infrastructures we rely on, as I mentioned here, yesterday, they're always invisible. And the problem with the invisible is that you don't really think a lot about it. So many infrastructures which we rely on are politically very kind of inappropriate because they are private and they are controlled by and driven by the profit. And then when it comes to, in some areas maybe it's not that important, but at least for this, having the knowledge distribution infrastructures, private and profit driven, in the long term is probably like a very, very bad thing for the society. So then it's hard to build the infrastructures. That's just the first thing about the infrastructures. And then when you imagine and when you kind of, when you should rely on an infrastructure, it's the part of that is how to get people join your vision. And here we have a small kind of attempt, and that's about the amateur librarian. So to join that infrastructure as a librarian, and I will try to tell you the story about, and that's my personal story about how I'm amateur librarian, and maybe with hoping that you will join, not necessarily through the same kind of activities, but just to get you on the track with some of the reasons. So you will see in the first three that we are using the Calibre software, and I would say a few things about just a second. A few things about the software. It's used by millions. It's let me just bring one tab. And it's called like an e-book management software, and most of the people use it for the conversion from one format to another. And then again, it became useful for millions of people, mostly because of the infrastructures, profit-driven. So Amazon being the biggest player in that field, the Kindle used to be the one on which you wouldn't be able to read PDFs. So people would find the PDFs online from sources like Lütgert, Arc, and all of the works you can also see here. And then you end up with a huge number of books, but then you can't really like read them on a Kindle, because on a Kindle it's supposed to be that you license the book from Amazon so that you can read it. And then Calibre is the software which used to help a lot in converting from PDFs and others to Mobi, which you could read on Kindle. These days it's a little bit better, so that it's not anymore that you can't read, but still it's used mostly for conversion. So most of the libraries in Calibre are not this well maintained. So I have here like a 2000 or like 1900, and it's very rare like this one that it doesn't have like a description and all other metadata. So it could be used in different ways. It's not, so what I'm trying to say is that most of the people would have like hundreds of books, but without any metadata. It's just that they put it into the Calibre, they converted it, and then they just like downloaded the file. But it could be done, it could be used for many other. I will just show you a little thing here. You can't see, that's the kind of incompatibility. The menu was just opened on the first screen. Okay, so I'm showing you here that it can be used also not just for the files, but also just as a placeholder for the collections. This is just from the Mayday rooms in London. They are the rather new institution which will do archiving and documenting of the protest and leftist struggles from the whole history. And then this is just the beginning of the collection. And this is what I added. So it's kind of a database software which you can easily customize. And adding these things, getting into this kind of, okay, this is very small. Yeah, adding these kind of things here is why it doesn't. It's just it was like super easy. It was super easy. It took me like 10 minutes after I knew what would be the new categories. So in a way, you can think of that as a database software, not just software for maintaining or like converting the one file format to another. So I would like to start with, I won't show you that book, but yeah, because we don't have enough time, but just a story about the tools and the professions. So every field of knowledge, scientific field, or just a field of kind of like a well-structured knowledge, it doesn't start as well-articulate, structured knowledge. It's kind of a struggle of the field with other fields historically to get accepted. And we could hear yesterday from Simon about legitimizing, about authority, which can claim certain field, which can claim certain institutions. So what happens for some field is that it needs to structure its knowledge, it needs to structure its learning processes, so how do you actually get into the field? And then when it gets to certain kind of level of the structure, it is a good candidate for the academy. So then it can get its department. And then profession is in a way like getting better and better accepted in society. And of course it's full of politics. It's full of what does it serve as the dominant paradigm, and all of I love Immanuel Wallerstein when it comes to that, to explain that process. But I'm not telling you like the whole kind of historical story about it. What I'm trying to say is that when you structure your knowledge, when you structure it for academia, you do the curriculums, you do all kind of things, then at certain moment, that field will meet with the possibility of transforming that knowledge, that structured knowledge, into the software tool. And there is one blog post which I wrote, which talks about it, and that's how I can remind you about it. Is like just imagine the field of photography. You can study photography. You can be a photographer. There is a profession. You can be a professional photographer. But then what happens when Photoshop kind of comes into your field? What does it change? So who can use Photoshop? Is it only professional photographers or amateurs? Then if you go in the photography, if you get just closer to today, then for example Instagram. So what's the Instagram? It's again kind of the structured knowledge about the photography, which was transformed into the software tool which millions can use, but which has embedded so much from that field. So the way how the photography kind of relates to the emotions and all of these things, so you just make immediately something from the 70s, all of that. So what does it mean, and how the field should react? That's a big deal. Then, if, for example, the journalism, in journalism, when the blogs came out, and if you know about the history of the software tools and of internet, blog is just the name for adding the snippets with a timestamp. So it's just like a log. But then it became really big when everybody started to talk about it as blogs, and then journalism got kind of challenged through that, because now all of a sudden we have a lot of bloggers, we have a lot of amateurs who are coming into the field. They are lowering the wages, they are changing the whole kind of configuration of the labor, and the surplus value, how it is made, who will be paid, who will pay for that, and all of these things. So that's another example. And I like to talk about that in that kind of line. Let me see the lot of before and after Calibre. That's the one blog post. And that's the book which I I really recommend his work. I have his book Computer Boys Take Over. That's where I found that reference, especially about the professions and how they kind of get accepted into the society. So there is another one I heard from Vuk, for example, the advertisement industry. So I'm sure that you know about the design and photography with the Photoshop, architecture with the AutoCAD and things like that. But then there is also other industries like advertisement after AdWords. You know, like what does it change? How it changed the configuration when you have like a elephant in a room like Google, who can provide, when you pay, who can provide measurements, who can provide almost like in real time how people react on your advertisement. So then the whole kind of 50% of investment, you know, that kind of line from the advertisement that it works, that half of the investment works, but you never know which half of your investment really works, something like that. So anyway, I heard from Luke quite some words about AdWords and how the advertisement industry should change. So why I'm reading this is that there is Calibre is something which happened to librarianship, to the field of librarians and information sciences. And this is the way, this is the moment which the field should appropriate. So there are amateurs who are coming to that field, they are also producing some new knowledges, and then you can hear all of these stories which you could hear from other disciplines. So librarians would say, Calibre, this is not the proper software, you know, because Koha, and you could see that they think in a much wider scope. But then, if you think about how some things could be done, then you can see that Koha and other softwares, especially the proprietary software, are super expensive in setting up, super expensive in maintaining, super expensive in finding the people who can work with that. And with Calibre, in a way, it's like a 10 minutes. So of course that it doesn't cover all of the promises and all of the expectations of the professional librarianships, but I will try to show you what's the scope, what can be done. And I would like to tell you just a little bit more from another book, Computers Boys, that's what I mentioned.
There are no girls.
Nathan, yes, Nathan is also writing a book on girls. And there are like quite few, so it's not like that the boy was just like celebrating the boys' culture. I recommend this book. It's for sure not the book which gets into all of, it's not like a gender issues based, but it's a good scholar, it's a very good scholar. And I'm really like looking forward to read his book on the role and like, of women in the computer industry, because that kind of, it's kind of getting out now. It used to be like more, and then somehow in like the late 70s it completely changed, and now we are just left with only boys. And that's exactly why he called that Computer Boys. So it's not without a reason. So here I found that reference on the professions. Another book which I would like to talk, I will talk only about 3 books here, I don't want to like take too much time. Yeah, good. It's another very good book, it's a big switch, Rewiring the World from Edison to Google by Nicholas Carr. I really love this book except the very last part, where I just don't agree really with the conclusions. But the great scholarly work is done here. And I will tell you only about one story from that, and that's about the story about Samuel Insull, who used to work for Edison. So at the time when Edison started, the infrastructure. So that's like the late 19th century. So factories really needed electricity to to get their engines running. But the way how they would do that is that they would just build electrical power plant inside of the factory. And then, because it was a very kind of early days, then people, this is not good microphone for Dalmatians, Italians, and others from the Mediterranean. So at that time, Edison was competing with others, and he was promising that he can do that cheap enough and cheap for maintenance. So he would he would try to convince the manufacturers, the factories, that his company is better in running that for them, so that they don't need to hire the local geek at the late 19th century to build the electrical power plant, but they have a product in a way and the service. So that was their business model in the vocabulary of today's computer industry world. And it was very successful, so Thomas Edison was not keen to change that. But then bureaucrat, the account in his company, he had an idea. And at that time it was also not the time when you would have the market of accounts and bureaucrats. Because today you can just ask, oh, we need to hire, give us your CV, and then the account can say, oh yeah, I worked for 3 companies, now I can work for you. At that time, you would have account and the bureaucrat working for the same company for the whole life, because it didn't become, in that sense, a profession. So he was there, and he proposed that electricity, he envisioned electricity as gas and water infrastructure. So he said, well, we can have a tap, so you can just have that kind of plug, whatever, and then you have electricity, and then you can distribute it completely, to the whole world, not just to the small or the big factories. And then Edison he was a smart guy, a good businessman, so he didn't get it at first, but he let him develop that idea, and that's how we got the electrical distribution networks. But in order to get it, it was not just the envisioning that it could be done, it was also the change. It was the change in abstracting that to the level of, for example, how you would pay for that, or how you would charge for that, which was much more of a focus from Samuel Insull. So he came up with that kind of a dynamic pricing thing, so that that you can have a cheaper price at the time when the electricity is not in use. And today it's the cheap one is during the night, because there are a lot of people who are sleeping at that time, and then if you're a factory, then you can get it for cheaper, or you can also get the cheaper price as a factory because you are using a lot. So that's kind of the price, a dynamic price kind of thing was necessary to actually build that kind of infrastructure. And that was built, in US. It was built, as you can see, through the private company, private capital, as many things are happening in US, and it's a huge it's a huge project. It's a project in a sense for the wholeness of a society, and the very few societies were able to build it in that way. So that's why we have the electricity distribution in most of the countries not run as a private company, but being nationalized. And there is a quite nice story. It's not here. It's in another book about how Great Britain was changing that and how they were catching up, bringing that electrical distribution, but then realizing that if they will leave it to the market logic, that they will just kind of collapse in a sense. And then they built the national grid and changed, being completely nationalized. But they said, okay, we will take care of the distribution, but on the ends of making that, like generating that electricity, we will just let it do through the market logic, so you can compete with the price. It's a very interesting one, because I think when we talk about the infrastructure and the argument should it be public, how it should be governed, I think that these are the historical examples where we can learn a lot, and where we should abstract, use it as a metaphor, and make our argument through these like analogies and things like that. And then the last one, yes, of course.
I think that's really important, because that's really important to kind of point out these kind of conditions for knowledge, because that's where the digital mixes with the materiality. And last night you said you're a communist when it comes to digital goods, basically, but you limited this a little bit.
No, I said I'm communist. But you know that it's
no, but in the second sense, you said when it comes to digital goods, and that's the first step. And
yeah, you're right, sorry.
The question is really how much can we kind of isolate the two, because there's probably no digital goods that are not based on material carriers of all kinds of infrastructures and so on and so forth. So
when I like,
I mean,
suggest
you talk about this now from a historical perspective, but I think when we talk about digital goods today and circulation freedom, we have to include the material conditions for that. Otherwise, it's only half of it.
I absolutely agree. I try not to isolate it from the material conditions. I think that we can't do everything at once in any kind of field, in any kind of topic. So I think that, I mean, because then it's kind of religious, you know, like you just get into enlightenment in a moment. I think that in getting like into analysis or into communication, I think that we need to get into the discrete units in knowledge, and then we go slowly, like getting another discrete unit by abstracting, and then knowing what are the elements. I'm kind of simplifying completely, but that's how I see that. So it's a step in knowledge. We go like step by step, and then it's very. I think that it's very important in transfer of knowledge to get another end convinced. Because if I say something and you are not convinced, I can see that you are not convinced at the moment, so I'm trying to convince you so that we can move. And how I try to convince it is not saying like, hey, and that's it, but I'm just trying to make argument in like comprehensible, and through analysis, through analogies, through historical examples, and also agreeing with you, because when you say material conditions, that discrete unit, I absolutely subscribe to. So if I ever like make argument where you can say, oh, there is like no mention of material conditions, I would say, oh, then I'm wrong, Lord, I just like missed that. And if I have to do that for the digital, and I will not do that here, like in this lecture, I think another great example is like a Bitcoin, not because I think that it's a great project which will save the economy. I think that it's run mostly by like a moron, like libertarian, selfish morons. But what it proves is that that there is like there is a power of abstraction where even the currency, even the kind of the running the whole world of a currency is then transformed into electricity. So if you want to think of the bitcoins, it's very much material conditions, because you can say how many, it's like a watt per computer cycle, you know, like, so making efficient like an engine to make new coins, to make money, like a money-making machine. It should be optimized in a way that it doesn't spend too much electricity, because that's what you really pay. So at the end of the day, if you are into money-making machine, you will actually pay for the electricity. After like maybe a month, you don't really care about the initial investment into the hardware, for example. So that's how I kind of relate to the material conditions and understanding how that kind of transform. And I'm not good in, I know because being surrounded by like a hardcore Marxist, my kind of discrete units are less historical materialism and more like I don't know, like a socialist cybernetics. And I think that these two can meet. I don't think that one is better than the other in that sense. I just think that it's the device you know more. And I think that with my devices, I understand technological infrastructures in a better way than most of my friends with the very hardcore line of a historical materialism, because many times they just don't get technology at all. Because for them, Frankfurt School solved everything. And I'm like, not really. I mean, look at today's world. Maybe you can really explain it, but then there are also like even more efficient explanations, like creationism and like believing in God. It's, it's everything given. So that's kind of how I relate to that. So I agree, material conditions are absolutely part of it, and how I try to get it is like, usually my exit node is electricity when I talk about this. Yeah. And if it's corporation, then it's not just electricity, but also the revenue. So if you have Google and Amazon, then you have a revenue, and then you have also electricity. And then in order to understand that, you need to know a little bit about technology. And that's what I'm trying to do in the next from the next book. Because it's not just technology, it's a digital, it's a computer. And from the computer boys take over, there is also a nice term which Nathan was, I only remember first name, Nathan, because I can't pronounce. What was the name? Yeah. Ensmenger. Yeah, I knew that someone could. Yeah, because I never really pronounce it. I just know it as an image. Nathan Esmenger. He also introduced the computer world. So that's a term for him. That's it's not like computer engineering, software engineering. It's not software architects. There are too many. And then he said for the actors, these are computer boys in general. And then this is the computer world. And I like that. I use that term. That comes from that book. So here it's another great book. It's called Paper Knowledge, 12 Media History of Documents. It's done by oops. What happened here? It's not, okay. This is also a good book, Paper Knowledge. But I was like, what? Okay. Markus Krajewski, I was really I really wanted him to come here, but he couldn't, he's in Sweden now. So this is his book, it's called Paper Machines. And I'll tell you a little story from there. So he's, and that's what I make as argument for metadata. So I don't make argument for becoming a librarian. If you're a Marxist and librarian, and I want to convince you to become a librarian, I will not say that because that will help people. That when you really maintain your metadata, that it will just be useful for other people, for your users and things like that. My argument will be more from this book, and that's about, it's a history of the idea of index catalog, card catalog. So how do you make a catalog? How do you maintain the list of things? And it starts in a 15th century, and then people will okay, it's good to have a list, and then would we make a list in a book or in something else? And then the book proved that it's linear, that you can't really change the pages. It's just that the story goes, because of the bind, you like bind the time in that sense, and it becomes linear. In most of the cases, that's just fine. If you don't have like many lists, if you don't have to process a lot of information, the book, just like a bookkeeping in that sense, would be just enough. But then the idea was like developing more and more, like Leibniz and many others, and they would say like, no, it's better to have like the item in a autonomous form, like a card, and then you have a catalog of cards, and then every card has a address, like a memory in a sense, like its place in that catalog, and then any card can also point to other card because every card has kind of a memory address in a sense, and that was like that was proof that it's a much more that it's superior device for cataloging than the book. But at some moment, because of material conditions, you couldn't really make it, because you couldn't find the manufacturers who can make a good index cards which are always the same size. We don't really, it's hard to imagine it from today's perspective, but that was one of the reasons why that argument was not that convincing at certain moment. So this book is about the catalogs and how they got more and more developed, especially in the 19th century. How some of the great projects like Mundaneum and the Bridge in German, that's another one, yeah, inspired by the Mundaneum. Mundaneum, just like one sentence about the Mundaneum. Mundaneum was a project by Paul Atlat and Henry Lafontaine, where they made like a super slow Wikipedia in 1910. So they had 12 million index cards about different things in the world, 12 million. You could subscribe to some of them, then it will come to you by mail, and then you could just like ask for more. And they started to build many of these. Just imagine that in 1910. And they got a big investment from a Belgian government, but then the First World came, and also the BRIC was just in 1911, but because of the First World War, all collapsed. But the idea of index catalog was still developing, and in the 30s, there are beautiful images here. Actually, that was like a being in a computer. Today, we are in front of a computer, but at that time, that idea of processing information, of getting into the very advanced processing information, was more like if you heard from the scandal of Evgeny Morozov and Edina, the cybernetics revolutionaries, the Chile, the Allende. Never mind, it's another book. So it's more like being in a cockpit, you know. So you are surrounded with devices which helps you to process the information. And businesses were actually much more keen to use it than the libraries, because at that moment libraries were also like quite established, better established, in a way that they were not like they were not that keen to go for the new technologies. The very strong argument is still that there is no technology comparing to the librarian as a human. So sometimes people will go very strongly for that. I'm not keen of that. I think that the librarian, if it's knowledgeable, can use the technology. If it's not knowledgeable, then technology can be used against the libraries and against the library. That's kind of my take on that. Anyway, that was in the 30s. And then the kind of very simple idea of having the items with the memories, and then you can like exchange these. I don't know how, yeah, probably not many of you, and I want to end, but I'll just like, I'll end with more like a mystical. I don't have enough time to explain you, but I'll try in a few sentences. So the idea of a Turing machine is just like a paper, like a story, that there is a tape, there is a head, and then that head, the tape can go like one step left or one step right. So you can like program that kind of a machine so that you can move the tape in one or other direction. And that tape is, in that sense, ideal. It's like eternal. And then you have the table of like so you can recognize, the head can recognize like what's in that kind of field. It can recognize the sign, and then through the table, it can just like swap, it can replace that sign with something else. So you can just imagine there is a letter A, then there is a table saying that letter A, whenever you see the letter A, change it into letter B and move twice on the left, or move just left. So that idea is super simple. There is nothing really to not grasp, but that conceptually is the foundation of everything we have today in computers. So conceptually, the computers are compatible. They can be reduced conceptually to the Turing machine. So they are doing a lot of these read and writes over these A's and B's, and that's how we get the whole world of computers. And this book is great in getting very close to bringing the library catalog and index catalog close to the computer. So in a way you can see it in one line, one historical kind of trajectory. There is no like a formal proof for that. So if there is any computer scientist here, we can try to like formalize it more, but I think that just for the sake of the stories, it's good enough. And that's my argument why we should get there. And that's the start. Structuring data, caring about it, can lead us to this complexity of the computer world today. And now, just like from the 30s, the businesses are much more keen to use that, much more keen to kind of get it for their kind of profit. But it would be great if counter-public, which we can call public or public, whatever we call it, but if we take care of that, not of the businesses. So in a way, the kind of a battle was lost in the 30s from the businesses, and libraries are slowly getting there. Libraries are still important for the information sciences, but it moved from the buildings into more like into the computer world. It's still important, but the surplus value usually goes into other kind of areas. So this could be an attempt to at least to play with it, to play with the idea. I don't think that we can ever take over, but I think that we can keep the idea alive that these infrastructures could be different, and that's where I think that this is the first step, that we can at least point to the one very inappropriate concept of private property when it comes to intellectual production. So at least this is, for me, the completely clear case, and this could be done, in my opinion, through these kind of attempts. I didn't formalize it. I have to move, but we can discuss more if you're not convinced by the argument. Yeah, let's discuss. Tommy, maybe you can join up.
I don't know, maybe tomorrow.
So should we start?
It's not 12:30.
Hmm?
It's not 12:30, so maybe you take questions.
Okay, then it was only me. I was talking for too long. Dubravka, yeah, I can also tell you like what we can hear tomorrow then from Dubravka and from Tommy. I'm sorry I took so much. So Dubravka can tell you more tomorrow how she did, but also why, and what's her interest in doing the New Left review. It's now 3,000, almost the whole New Left review from the beginning, all of the articles, and Calibre doesn't have support for New Left review, and then this was done all like manually, like author, title. So this is very useful. But then again, it's about what.
Maybe not everybody knows how to deal with the IDs, supporting data or something.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if you are familiar with the Calibre, because sometimes we are talking about how to use it, and maybe the people don't know how to download metadata or something. Because this is also important when you import it, metadata, you can take it from different places, no? And then
Yeah, but in this case, that's what I was referring to, and I would rather have Dubravka to show you that. I don't know, maybe not now, but yeah, Calibre allows you to download metadata with one click, but that's usually from the sources which has that item.
Google.
Like books, when you have ISBN or like
Open library.
Yeah, open
But
library,
this is
Amazon. So
because that's also an interesting point to me, because
Yeah.
I mean I made my first experience with Calibre, and then you get this data, but of course if I have, for example, my PDF is another edition. It's not from 2005, but from 2006. I must do it manually because I'm always just related to the Google. So I have Google in the machine again. So I was a little bit like saying, wow, how can I avoid to get a Google data bank, and then finally, if I put this online, I do Google a favor. So I was thinking.
No, because this is also, to me, it's a political decision, because normally this is, for me, is the main point, because this is like we are still working like a physical library, and we are depending for classical way of classify information, so we are still controlling by the archive itself. So for me, it's coming back to Foucault, the archive is still watching us at that moment. If we are not giving new arguments to Calibre or all these tools, we're still in the same way of classify, of controlling information, something. And that, for me, is very important. Let's see after that.
I lost
way
the
of
internet.
Facts. Yeah, yeah.
So that's why.
No, but it doesn't matter. Maybe we can see the data, where they are coming from.
The data. So that's, yeah.
No, also this data that you already have.
Yeah. So I can relate to that. So what I mentioned before is that there is no like an online source for your left tribute. So that was done manually. So you can do that manually. But then you also have like the sources which you can add here. So here I have Open Library, Google, and Amazon, which I use.
Yeah.
So the metadata which comes here, controlled by the archive, and I would say that there are a couple of fields which are less politically charged than others. So I would say that title of the book is less charged if it comes from Google. I think that having a title, having a front cover, having a design for front cover, that all brings politics into the book. Having the book as a product, there are like many kind of characteristics and properties of the book which are political. But when it has the title, I think it would be less politically charged than, because there is only one title of the book. Then author also doesn't change its name. In Syria, so there are quite few fields in the database which are supposedly in every archive the same, because the archives in that sense should be interoperative, so that you can like search ideally from one library to all others. So I would say that this is the most controversial one, because it mostly comes from Amazon, and that's the product description usually. And if you go through my Calibre library, it's mostly like what you do when you browse the Amazon. But at the same time, I understand. I think that it's absolutely the issue which we should.
For me also politically,
Yeah.
so we are connected with this part.
Yeah.
How you target the thing?
I target.
Yeah, because this is where you personally can give or add some information, your personal information, how to categorize the thing, because this was a classical point of discussion in the classical library. You are looking for gender books. There is no gender book in the classical library. So then here you have the capacity with this digital data to add and personalize and give your extra knowledge to the library and to classify it.
I agree, but I wouldn't fetish. I absolutely agree. I think that the subjective kind of layer of interpretation is super important. But I wouldn't get into the trap of saying that if we solve that, if we add that, or if you only have that the problem is solved. I wouldn't say that. At the moment, I need more of a kind of more convincing vision how these tags, in a sense, could be used. So I understand that in terms of the configuration of that, but when I just go through, what I added is like, here is tracing concepts, and I know what does it mean, and quite few people can find why, and if you go through that list, but I'm not sure if the tagging system, just on its own, like a flat keywords, without any relation in between tags, is actually the great device.
Only one?
Yeah, only one. And then like bringing more is in a way like where we should, or not we should, but where the complexity can happen. So I'm sure that computer scientists would get this. So here we can have a Turing complete programming language instead of a tag. But then very few people first get what I just said and then can actually use it. That's another problem. So I agree, but there is also another thing, and I think that argument Kenneth Goldsmith makes very strong, and that's that we steal from them just like they stole from us. So in a way, Amazon data is not just corporative. They didn't invent that. So it's what they did is that they are the first one to extract the value, like a monetary value from that by selling that. But that data is not only Amazon. It's provided mostly by the many small publishers, book lovers, producers, editors, authors. So in a way, they are our proxy to some of these descriptions. And of course we can say, but when the description is written for Amazon, it's probably different than how it would be if there is no Amazon, if there is no proxy, if you have like a public library, just like straight, without the proxy. But in a way, I'm not worried that much at this particular moment about just downloading data from Amazon.
Oh, you have no problem.
Yeah. And Ken is like saying all the time.
Not to reply the physical library, because otherwise we have the same tool that we had before. Here they have, I don't know, more book than you have it, and the problem is how to find it, how to relate it. When you say paper machine that is related with the desk, but they are looking for a new tool, and the machine needs to relate with this topic, because I am working in this. This is that they are looking for, maybe for the future. I know that the Calibre, we are sometimes very, very fast, because it's very new tool. And we need to appropriate it, like you say, redesign or something. But by the moment we are replying the physical library, exactly the same technique and the same machine. This is what they say.
Yeah.
Reply.
Was there an answer to that? No? Okay.
No.
All right.
I agree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I would expect a political heat map of the metadata entry form for Calibre would be a meaningful tool to start talking of what to put on the interface later. What you're saying is that maybe it would be useful to have some sort of a view more tags or something like that, where you can see literally hundreds of millions or infinite number of tags that people apply to any given piece of book. Then it hits the usability, software usability border at some point, but I believe it should be open as opposed to what Amazon is doing by rather strictly limiting the options. So the findability, the discovery of the books through that particular one single channel would be different than through any other channel. But you see the very fundamental premise that if we keep doing things the old way, like the analog way in the digital world, I have a problem with that simply because I'm discovering that the digital world, even though it's my life for 20 years now, right? Is not really replacing things. It's just enhancing, things like electricity, just using the same approach as water did 2,500 years before, or 6,000, depends on which archaeologist you are. And So we shouldn't be very nervous about doing some stuff the old way.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's cool.
No, I think that it's very hard to bring arguments without like getting into the getting classified. So when I bring Turing machine as argument, I'm not like trying to say that we should do that in your way, forget about the old way and things like that. What I can just like relate to what you just said is that the things which you propose can happen after we have certain, let's use the data set, let's structured data, and then you can come up with a designer with a little bit of help of a programmer, ideally programmer and designer in the same person, things like that. Then that could happen just in terms of the user interface. But then I think that that what's much more important, and that's what we are trying to do here, but it's hard to always say everything at once. So here we also like propose this exactly format what I'm doing now. We call a repertorium, which is the structured data, but which meets with storytelling. So what I wanted to do here is like I'm a storyteller. Maybe I'm not the best storyteller. Maybe we need like a better storyteller. So I don't expect you to say no, you're good. It doesn't matter. It's just that
Nobody said it. Listen to this silence.
Yeah. No, so what I'm trying to say is that the storytelling, that getting in social interaction is the most important thing. And then we kind of propose the formats. So if you have your collection, if it's not already cataloged, please catalog it, because it makes it stronger argument to the rest of the world. But I'm ready to hear the stories from people, even if it's from a messy one, because I understand like all of the critiques, and actually I would prefer sometimes the stories from the messy ones. But it's not just that I want to hear the messy storytelling. It's not. I think that is it catalog or not? It's not that much of a story. But if the story is completely mess, I'm not sure that I want to hear that story. That's just my take on the mess and organization.
Let me use this mic.
And also just one more thing. It's that the spaces. It's where it's now we kind of in this project. There is like a Calafó in Spain, which is an anarchist colony, having the book scanner. There is a Mama Culture Center. Then there is a ignorant schoolmaster in Belgrade, a public school in Berlin. So you can just like, if you know any of these, if you know 2 out of any of that list, you would kind of guess what kind of knowledge is already there. So in that sense, I'm not afraid of that group becoming the new evil structure librarians who just impose and enforce their like a very bad ideology on people.
Look, oh wait, shut up, I have a microphone, fuck you. I was like, wait. Look, there's no difference in opinion here, there's just a difference in size of opinion. Mm-hmm. I'm not discussing or opposing what you're saying, because I think it's lovely and that's what brings me here. The thing is that I'm trying to suggest that maybe it is beneficial to the entire debate if you draw a slightly bigger map of the territory, and even though there's a lot of, actually, but a massive amount of work to be done still at a very individual level of a user of an application done by another single guy. Come on, it's a very small little fragment of the whole map, right? You can already now...
You mean like Calibre?
Yeah, your personal relation to Calibre and then the political heat map of Calibre entry fields, come on.
Yeah.
And it is actually a very tiny question, okay? But it does have massive implications later on. And then already now we can, of course, understand that there are things outside of your interfacing with Calibre user interface, and which are questions of, is there a possibility, theoretically, or maybe even practically, that we can visit right now, that after a certain critical mass of users, and already now it is quite a huge mass, of Calibre, might interfere maybe with this power rule, you know, the long tail distribution of popularity of headlines of pop books. And we can check the neighboring fields, you know, the arenas of music and film, whether maybe something similar has happened in some way, or maybe not. Did the you know, atomization of LP or an album, do anything to distribute for distribution of music, or maybe it's just managed to switch ownership from 5 major labels to 1 major label, which is Apple now. And this may be happening with books. This kind of question.
In that direction, I would just like to emphasize that I think that there is a difference which comes with scale. I don't think that in the way how we run this project that we can get to big data scale. I'm not sure if I would like it. So there is a joke that if this project becomes successful, then we'll have more of Jesus Loves You books in that. And I'm not sure if I would like to see it. It's not that, I mean, conceptually it's great, but then in terms of the user interface, do you really want to because what can happen, for example, you have like some exclusive kind of group, which are like suppressed Marxist, leftist kind, so they are like now enthusiastic enough to do a lot of book scanning because we are losing, and then we kind of hope that through the dissemination of knowledge, particular knowledge, we can kind of get back or just get into something new. Then there is another group which is doing that for longer, and that's like religious groups, and they're also quite enthusiastic. In Europe they're not that strong, but if you go and see it's also the kind of the relation which also happens with civil society many times. In Eastern Europe you don't really understand that the religious groups are part of the civil society, and Soros was only financing the leftists, and then at some moment civil society really exploded, and now there are a bunch of religious fanatics, and then like, oops, this is the problem. So I think that the same can happen in the popularity of these kind of projects, and then you have some kind of like a strange mixture, which is not ready for big data, like what Amazon and Google do, so that you can have a big overview because you are looking at that from the bird view and something like happens there, but you have actually not big data but small data still, and small data in between two very competing, opposing corpuses of knowledges. I'm just trying to say that this is how I see it, and that the scale is very important, and at this scale, of the small scale, discursive is most important. And some other scale, there are other kind of discourses, but more meta, which can deal with that. And it's just like, this is the possible scenarios.
The question is what motivates you? Is it therapy or it's society changing? Right? If you're doing it for your very own reasons,
it's not well-formed question. I don't want to answer
how can you
that
separate
to
that?
you.
How can you separate that?
Exactly.
Society is what creates psychology.
Exactly my point. The trick being that you cannot just say, I'm doing it because I like it, and because I think we should all do it because we like it. There should be a bigger reason and a vision that describes a new setup for creating and consuming knowledge that opposes the state we are born into.
I don't trust statements that much. I can say, I can promise. I mean, if you look into the mission of Google, this is like I subscribe to that. The statements which many of these would do, I would subscribe to that as a statement, but knowing who said it, in which way, that's where things get complicated. So in that sense, I think that there is also a twist. Kenneth Goldsmith, again, he's the master of twisting, saying one thing, but knowing that people will see completely different things. So he says, I'm the stupidest guy in a room, and he knows that most of the people, or all of the people, will just say, oh, he's the smartest one, just by, So in that sense, it's a game. It's very hard to say what's your motivation without anticipating what will be the result. And at the same time, there is no way that that result can be universal. For part of the audience will be one, for the other part of the audience will be another. So what's the agenda? It's kind of complicated.
But there's this, this is the little detail that actually is very clear, but actually, because we didn't talk,
because the one thing is to have that calibre system, I mean to have this easy way to categorize and maybe to bring some, but there is a step to put this online, no? And so all this, like in Zagreb, they are all online, because this means not only that you share it, but you go in this next step between the legal and illegal, etc. So is this, for example, with all the groups you're working in, you're sharing the book scanner, it's that they always put this online, or that they sometimes say we share this in our community?
It's hard to. I mean, I think that it's very unstable, as you know. Like all of these social interactions, especially like the self-organized groups, it's always like dealing with. So, for example, the Spain, there are like beautiful things happening there. A lot of people are involved, but the outcome in number of books is not that big. It's like maybe 20 books at the moment, but there are like many in queue. So if you want to like measure it through the number of books scanned, then there are not many. But if you actually go and see how much happened in between different groups, how many groups now ask for the book scanner, how many groups plan to do that, then that just one measurement changes a lot. But I think that going into the measurements, like that kind of things, is in most of the cases like wrong. It just doesn't like address what's happening. But then in some other, like in Mama, it's quite stable, you know, like Culture Center, Zagreb, it started there, Tomi is there. It's just like much better, it's like 250 books, and some of them are already here. So it's always about the states, how stable, or how precarious.
No, but my question was, are they all going online? Are they all online?
The idea is to go...
Or are there some who are more shared in this, I mean, who are closed? I mean, this is what was my question.
I think, yeah, it's still closed. I mean, yes. So I think that having one click to upload or to start to share, everybody are ready to do that. There is no politically in any of these places where they would say, no, we don't want that online. But there is a project which is close. You did an interview with the privacy project with Eva, and so they, for example, they don't want to put their library online. And that's a kind of political statement. We will talk about that in Munich on Friday. I don't agree with that. I don't get it. But they obviously are doing quite some work in articulating that. I would like to hear. So in that sense, like getting that online is just like kind of a side effect of understanding the infrastructures and technology in a certain way. So it's a not big deal. Much bigger deal for most of the people involved is how we get and what we do in terms of the social interactions. What's the context where that happens? And then, you know, like in Zagreb, praxis, like that, like Yugoslav legacy of the, like that branch of Marxism, that's what's important. You know, it's not that we start and say like, we will scan everything Yugoslav ever. There is no way that we can do that, but then it's what we will do. So Tomi wants to do a collection of the books which were burned on island Korčula in 1991. So,
out of the library standing.
Sorry?
Thrown out of the library standing.
So, but they were referring to that as burned.
No.
They were not burned as in... Okay.
Metaphorically.
Okay, they were thrown away. Yeah. So we also asked about these titles. So it's pretty much like Kenneth Goldsmith here. It's like who will read it? No, because these books were also like there is almost no interest for these books. They were like part of the massive production of like ideology in Yugoslavia in a sense. Most of them. But we want to do that because that gesture will say something
but
more.
It's also about patrimony and memory. How to preserve it.
Yeah.
The information. This is very important. It's actually, you can see thousands of examples in Yugoslavia that represent history. Sarajevo, whatever. So this is, but I think very, we cannot miss the point because this is a very, very little point of a very big process of digitalization. Yes. Sooner or later, everything will be digital or not. But I think we are in the process. Maybe you have not the capacity, but this machine.
No. Absolutely.
near future will be more.
I can give you the 250 books
Yeah.
in this project, let's say, the scale. 2.5 million at Herbordt,
Yeah.
25 million at Google.
But but I think this is a process, and you can see, for example, that totally out of this our group of people or something, you can see this is a new phenomenon. But in Brazil, for example, that they are putting Pirate Bay every week, like 1,000 books. They are digitalizing every school, every university, every single group of something, and then there are people just ordering this philosophy, mathematics, something like that. So we are involved in a very big process that sooner or later will finish, and maybe every or most of our book will be in digital. No, not only book, every document will be digital, and then the question will be totally different.
Yeah.
What to do with this?
I think that there is again like a structured field in the librarianship, and it's called in archiving. It's called activation nodes.
Yeah.
So you can think of that as kind of part of that structure, but then that field is huge. So how to activate something from that memory? And that's the biggest challenge. But it's different. Like kind of what I like to think of is it's different in different moments.
Yeah.
In 2014, here it's the activation nodes for the books, for the collections, and it's different than in 2024. And will be much different in 2034. You know, but I think that still the context, as in structured data, critique of that, it will
question of
it will
control.
stay. Yes.
Who control